I decided I have long drives these days. I moved. Didn't use my GPS. So I can't watch all the YouTube videos anymore. This is a pain in the butt, but I can listen to podcasts. So I was like, what am I going to listen to? Normally, actually, I listen to Jewish stuff, but I decided, Paul recently mentioned that he's, one of his favorite things to do is his Bible, study / his Bible study, and also his, I think his Bible study in the rough drafts, right? I think this is a Bible study, so I haven't listened to many of the Bible studies, honestly, but I'm listening to one from a couple weeks ago, a while ago, maybe it's a month ago, to check, about the Corinthians and the logos of the cross. And there's a number of things that actually struck me that I think might be bear a bit of a Jewish commentary on. So the first was, he mentions, the logos of the cross, kind of changing from the Roman context to the Christian one, and then it's imbued with all this Christian meaning, and that kind of affects the world. So I think it's not insignificant that, right, the logos of the cross for Jews has not really changed since the Roman period. We have a long memory, and we still remember lots of martyrs from the Roman period who were crucified. Many, whatever, lots of people. And there's kind of a reason where, I think my first discussion about the cross here probably was with Shari, but to me it's a very disturbing symbol still. That hasn't changed, because I still associate it with kind of this torturous method of killing somebody, and that logos has not been replaced, certainly not for me and us. There's also an interesting kind of thing happening here, I think, where I don't exactly, right, I don't know the New Testament as well as Jacob does. I don't know exactly what's going on in Corinth with that community that Paul's addressing. However, I think it's interesting that, right, that certainly PVK is reading that as, very much, they're embedded in a Greco-Roman kind of zero-sum game, more situation, competitive, and it doesn't sound very Jewish, right? We're not judging it from a Jewish context, in fact, right? We're saying they're basically acting like non-Jews. And I think that's one way certainly to read what Paul's saying here. And I do think it's interesting, right? Because at the same time, and especially his bit about follow Paul, follow who's the other guy, Apollos, and they really should all be working together. They're all one. They're all just doing different parts. That kind of echoes to me a sentiment in rabbinic literature, right, from the same period, right, when so at the same time this is happening, or earlier than this, let's say in the time of Jesus, right, there's kind of this big the Pharisees are very fractured in a sense of, the people attend different academies, they have different teachers, there's different kind of approaches, and something that they stress over and over again, because there is a period of where things get hot and there's contention and fighting, and then there's kind of a lot of pushback against that by people, by mostly their rabbis against their, telling their students cut it out. You guys need to work together, and you should. Importantly, right? So there's a bunch of things that come out of that, but I think the biggest things that come out of that are, right? That there's this principle I know Jacob has mentioned a million times. I've mentioned it because it's such a fundamental principle, kind of in Pharisaic thought, rabbinic thought. Later is there's two types of arguments. There are arguments for the sake of heaven. There's arguments that are not for the sake of heaven, and are kind of, or arguments not for the sake of heaven are, kind of look out your window, look at the election, everything that's been whatever. You see those all the time. That's kind of let's say. I mean, the paradigm example is Korach and Moshe in Numbers, but it's really any, right, politics, treating the world zero sum. Whereas arguments for the sake of heaven are those of, they say, of these two rabbinical schools. These two rabbinical schools, I mean, Hillel and Shammai are the two main ones, but there are other smaller ones, and they're both want what's best for the Jewish community. They both want to figure out what God wants from them, and they are both doing holy work. And there's the second piece of that same teaching is arguments for heaven endure and arguments for heaven don't endure, which seems like kind of what Paul's saying, right? So it's he seems to be, I don't know if this is specifically a Pharisaic thing or it's a more general kind of like Jewish thing compared to Greco-Roman, but there certainly seems to be a lot of resonance here between this Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, which is one of the older ones for sure, and it dates from this period, or a little before Paul, actually, probably. And the other thing that's important, right, is these people eat at each other's houses, and they let their kids marry each other. So even though they understand the world differently, they understand the law differently, right? One has a much more, I'd say, whatever. Jesus seems to be closer to the school of Hillel. I think, and that's a whole other discussion to be had. But there's one that's kind of a bit more, what do you want to say? Whatever. It gets into a whole longer discussion about Pharisaic politics in the in first centuries. So probably maybe not worth getting into right now. But I definitely see. This is one of the few places actually that I kind of see Paul echoing something that I normally don't really see if the Pharisaic side of him. But here I kind of see it actually, and I'm happy to admit when that element's there. The other thing though that I'm definitely seeing here, I think, is something that's a little bit different, which is kind of a more diasporan, Qumranite attitude. How do you say it? After the Persian period, and the development of the synagogue, the Babylonian period, Persian period, development of synagogues, and really the first time lots of Jews are living outside of the land of Israel, they don't know if the temple's going to be rebuilt, or they do, or it is rebuilt, but it's not the same, or they can't get there because they're too far now, so they can't, they can't go there for their pilgrimages. There's a whole kind of new understanding of what the synagogue is that starts to develop. And not the synagogue, the congregation. But I'm going to call it synagogue, but whatever. The congregation starts to develop. Whether you have people who actually build alternative temples, like in Leontopolis with the Temple of Onias, because they reject the corruption essentially of what's happening, I guess, in the middle Hasmonean or late Hasmonean period in the temple and the politics there. They're earlier Hasmonean. They are. At the transition into right before the Hasmoneans, they get temple politics. They think it becomes corrupt. A very similar thing, maybe the same events cause the communities formed by that, ascribe to the Damascus document that we associate with Qumran, but also Damascus and maybe in Egypt as well. And so there seems to be at least a diaspora, but both a diaspora and Israel-based movement of kind of people who form alternative congregations because they see corruption in the temple, and they often do call they think of themselves as temples. This is all kind of based on the verse in Exodus. So it said the verse says "Asuli mikdash," so make for me in this mikdash. And I'll dwell among them. Mikdash, of course, in later is the word used for temple, Beit HaMikdash, the house of Mikdash. It's really Mikdash means sanctified, so the house of sanctity. However, here this actually happens separate from the context of, let's say, building the tabernacle or anything. It's not the word used for the tabernacle either, honestly. Cool. So, there's definitely this concept, going back to Exodus, that they're already drawing from in this period
before the destruction of the temple. Right? Come on.
That the congregation is the temple, and in fact, the way the rabbis put this after the temple's destroyed is every synagogue is a mini temple, and yeah, I mean that's all like very Jewish, like very well rooted in Jewish ideas. Like Paul isn't like necessarily innovating here, but I do want to like say, right. So again, this kind of is yet another kind of aspect of how Jewish Paul is. He's just kind of in line with the rest of kind of standard Pharisaic, rabbinic. Not even that. Not even limited to that. I mean, it's beyond the sectarian divisions. He's kind of just in the standard world of Jewish thought at this point, with this sentiment. I do think it's interesting, and I guess my question for Paul might be, my PVK Paul, might be, there seems to be like this kind of funky balance here between Paul is right, he's so apocalyptic, he talks about the day of the Lord all the time, right? He like, that seems to be why he recommends not having children, and which I guess is kind of a bit of the irony, and yet he also is like talking seemingly about long-term stuff. So yeah, I would like to know like what's going on. Like, does he think the end of the world is nigh and Jesus' second coming is going to happen? And is he really talking long-term? Like, that's the question. Like, well, is it last because it endures over time, or does it endure through the destruction that he thinks is about to come as part of the day of the Lord? It also seems to be almost universalist to me. I was going to ask about that too. His whole thing about like, they're going to be saved, but only after like the purification bit of the parts that they built are destroyed. They still get saved, which kind of also has this like strong Lot and his daughters, escaping Sodom feel to it, almost, which is a kind of a funky image to evoke. Not necessarily a bad one. I mean, that's where Moab comes from, and Moab is, progenitor of Ruth, who's progenitor of David, the Davidic line, Messiah. It's an important part actually of Jewish theology that it come from Moab. That the Messiah has to come, is both an outsider and an insider in that sense. So there could be something there that he's trying to evoke. I don't know if he, it's hard for me to tell. But yeah, anyway, some thoughts.